Hello and welcome to Psychological Insights. Today's topic is thanatophobia. Well, we all know what phobia means. It's a fear of something, but thanato, what's that all about? I haven't heard of that in popular literature. What exactly is going on here? Well, today we're going to find out. Spoiler alert. Thanatophobia, the simple definition is fear of death and dying. But I have a feeling there's more to it than that. Today, we'll be speaking to Dr. Robert Hamm. He's a psychologist in West Hartford Center. I'm Pat Kasakoff. Stay with me. So, hello, Dr. Hamm. So, I gave a simple explanation of thanatophobia, fear of death and dying. How come we've never heard of it until now? What's going on here?
Well, it's not a diagnosable condition, so to speak, that's reimbursed by insurance industry. Maybe that's why. So the bottom
that would be a very good reason why. That would be one good reason why.
Yeah, I don't know why it's not a clinical diagnosis. I guess maybe because it's so pervasive, and maybe it doesn't seem to fit into the classical schema of when we think of mental disorders, because it's kind of more existential in nature, you might say. Fear of death. Death is, it's ubiquitous. So maybe that's why. I don't know for certain.
Well, tell me, has there been any examples in popular culture that perhaps the diagnosis of thanatophobia is not said, but something leads to it in popular culture? What would that be, if so?
There's something that leads to, well, I think it's, as I said, it's a universal, it's an existential issue. It's all around us. It's inevitable that in taxes, as the cliche goes. So it's in our culture because it's just a part of life. But I think it's, because it's so mysterious, it confounds us, doesn't it? And I think in our culture, in the West, modern Western civilization, we don't really have a very healthy relationship with death. We try to sweep it under the rug. We try to not think about it. And so it's not incorporated into our culture in a way that it's a little less, that would make it a little less scary, I think.
Yeah, no, I understand the scariness part of it, but I'm wondering if perhaps it's more prevalent now, given, I mean, I know this is odd, but given Jeff Bezos is flying into is flying into the universe, and there's a sense of what is going on? What is this all about? How are we doing that? Is there something to do with that, the awe of the world?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, as far as you mean space travel is concerned.
Well, I'm just giving that as an example because I know that there was a situation with William Shatner where he went up in Jeff Bezos, I think it's called the Blue Origin.
That's right. Yeah.
And he had some reaction to it. I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Sure. Yeah. He's 91 years old. He's an octogenarian, so more power to him. Yeah, he signed up for this. I think he got a free ride. I don't think it cost him, he claims. But I think if you do want to do this, it costs you like an enormous amount of money to do. But he described his experience. It was on social media and on the news. And I read it. It came out in the news about a week ago or so. I don't know if you saw it or not, but I was really struck with his experience as he was, because he was expecting it, like the movie 2001, and this is going to be really exciting. And it was to some degree. But what was, I think, more poignant in his experience, as he recounted, was that he was overwhelmed with a feeling of sadness. And this is described, evidently there's a term for it, it's called the overview effect that some astronauts have reported when they return from space travel. And they see the Earth, from their space capsule, and they feel a sense of longing, or a sense of belonging, if you will, to something that they hadn't really, the Earth, seen in the same perspective as something very precious and fragile. And so when Shatner was up in Bezos's Blue Origin spaceship, he felt an overwhelming sense of sadness about the state of the Earth, the state of the planet, and how we have degraded it, and how fragile it is. How we've lost. What was just a statistic came out recently? In the past 50 years, we've lost over 2/3 of the animal population. That's astounding.
2/3 of the
animal population in the world.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, that's, to me, that's amazing, and it's sad, to say the least. And then he moved his glance over to outer space. Turned away from the Earth to the space, and all he saw was just a big black void, and he was struck with how empty, blacker than any black he'd ever experienced, and he felt a great sense of emptiness. And so I think Shatner was telling us here that there's something very precious about this life, and something very terrifying about death, because it's unknown, and it brings us closer to life.
I'm thinking of the awe of existence when you see something that's sort of bigger than you, and you just have that sense of, and I know I've had it when I saw the Grand Canyon, or I was in Israel and Jordan, and I was traveling on the desert, and I saw 3 camels passing by me, and all I could see was desert. Or the first time that you see the ocean, first time I saw the Atlantic, I had that sense, that awe. And I think are you talking about that also?
Yeah, I am. I mean, I still, whenever I go to the ocean, I am still overwhelmed with that feeling of awe, the vastness of it, and the mystery of it. It does, and then you look at the horizon, and you have that feeling of almost like infinitude, you know what I mean? That this could go on forever, and what lies beyond. Yeah, that feeling, that awe. So that's in contrast to the terror, and they go together. That when we contemplate, or when we are faced with something that is, goes beyond our individual existence. So another example would be just witnessing a birth or a death. There's something so profound about those experiences that we don't understand, and all we can do is just look at it with a sense of bewilderment, feeling awestruck, because it's way beyond our understanding. So there's a term for this. It's called the noumena.
What is it called?
The noumena.
Noumena.
N-U-M-I-N-A. It's so philosophers use this term, and Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst, referred to this in talking about the collective unconscious. It's the noumena is the world or existence as it is, and we don't understand what it is, and so we're just awestruck by it, by how little we know and how overwhelming and how insignificant we are, right? Our little lives are in relation to it.
I do recall in my life, I was in a show once, and an actor walked off stage, and I walked behind him, and he fell back on me, and he died instantly. And this was a dinner theater, and there were about 8 people, 8 of us, and he just died. Like that was it. There was nothing anybody could do. And we still had to keep going on with what we were doing. But after we finished, everyone broke down completely. And we were crying hysterically. And it was just almost a feeling of dread and of sickness. Uh, uh, it, 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 I think it's talking to what you're talking about. You know, that feeling that, what am I doing here? Why me? We were just completely spent.
That's right. And you saw, that person just a moment before was fully alive.
Completely.
It's just astounding, and you cannot understand it or grasp it. So you can't help but wonder what happened and where did that person go? The idea that that person doesn't exist anymore and will never come back, ever, is just, it's more than what one can, almost more than what one can bear.
So
Yeah.
let me ask you another question on this, because as I said, I've only started hearing about it very, very, very in small doses recently. Is this a sociological phenomenon that's in this era, or did Freud have anything, like, did he have something to say about this?
I think, well, Freud did not so much have something to say about thanatophobia, although he was interested in thanatos, like the death instinct, death. But it is somewhat a current phenomenon, I believe, because I see in my clinical practice, since the pandemic, more patients are anxious about their lives, about the world that we live in. There's more fear of death. So I've had to deal with this phenomenon in some cases with patients who suffer from thanatophobia. But it is something that I think philosophers and psychologists have posited is probably something that mankind has struggled with since time began. As long as we have been aware that we are mortals, that we're not going to live forever, there has been a struggle to come to terms with that. We assume that the animals don't really contemplate this. Only humans are aware of this as we are. And since we've become aware of it, since before history began, we would assume that it has vexed, it's confounded human beings in trying to understand it. And so there was a book published in 1974, a Pulitzer Prize winning book by the author Ernest Becker called The Denial of Death, in which he posited that it's a universal phenomenon to try to deny it. So Becker cites the psychologist Otto Rank, who wrote about man's need for immortality. And in Rank's book, The Psychology and the Soul, he delineates how throughout civilization, there have been different eras throughout the history of mankind, where there have been culturally accepted ways of denying death, including the development of the idea of a spiritual world that exists simultaneously with the material world. So for Rank, he posited that this is one way of denying death. Another would be in conceptualizing our immortality as we do in a biological sense. It carried on through our genes, through our children, and from our ancestors carried forward. And finally, Rank was concerned about our current era, he called the psychological era, where we don't believe that, many people don't believe that God exists or that there's an afterlife, and nothing has come to replace it. And for that reason, man is in a psychological crisis with a sense of meaninglessness. And until mankind comes to terms with this, this is going to create a lot of anxiety, because there's no way that's sanctioned now in our culture where we can deny death anymore. And it hasn't been replaced. Um, it's Ronk's thesis that this is a basic need that we have since we've been aware of death to believe that we're immortal.
And did auto rank? I mean, I wouldn't know, but you would. Did auto rank gain any popularity with these theories? Because it seems to be quite well developed the way you're describing it. But I had never heard of it in popular culture, whereas we've heard of a lot of Freud's popular theories. So did this thanatophobia, this idea about death from auto rank, did it gain any popularity in its era?
No, unfortunately. I know I've talked about auto rank before, and
Yes, you have.
one or two other segments, and he's relatively obscure today, and it's unfortunate because I personally find his ideas very compelling. But there are different reasons. It's more than what we can get into in the show, why he isn't popular. But I think it does a disservice because he had a deep impact on modern psychology, clinical psychology, and on the more anthropological aspects of psychology that some of his cohorts, such as Freud and Jung, enjoyed exploring. But I think the idea of the need for immortality is probably pretty universal, but it not because of Ronk's writings, unfortunately.
Got it. What about the risk factors associated with this kind of thinking? Because you mentioned that you're seeing much more of this kind of thinking, this pervasive thinking about death and fear of dying in your clinical practice now than you ever did before, and you're timing it around the start of the pandemic. So what are the risk factors besides the pandemic?
That's a good question. It's aside from the fact that it's universal and it's been exacerbated, I think, by the pandemic, and it's also seasonal. The reason I brought up doing this topic tonight is because Halloween is the day of the dead is approaching.
Very, very timely, very sort of with it.
So I try to be timely if I can and current. But aside from those reasons, I think that there are certain risk factors. If you are suffering from loneliness, if you don't have good connections with people, if you're not leading a life. The Roman philosopher Marcus Aurelius, in his book Meditations, said that the best antidote for the fear of death, if you are consumed with it, is to get living.
Full life. A full life would be the antidote.
Start living. That's right. So if you're living a life that's not full, if you are living a life with a feeling of regrets, or you're fearful, you're disconnected, depressed, anxious, or if you have a history of anxiety, or if you've had, or depression, a recent loss in your life, or witnessed a death yourself, or witnessed someone who has suffered a painful or difficult death, or if you work in the field of healthcare.
So you mean like doctors and nurses or people like you?
That's right. Exactly.
Would that be a risk factor?
Yeah, someone who works in hospice care or in a hospital setting, or in mental health, or if you have been exposed to people who have suffered from violence and death, traumatic situation, or in where there has been war, things of that nature. All of those can be risk factors.
What about? Sorry, I interrupted you.
No.
Well, the one thing that you haven't mentioned is religious beliefs. And I notice a lot of people who have like strong religious beliefs, when death comes, they seem to be calmer than those people without religious beliefs, but I don't understand why.
Well, you don't understand it. I mean, it seems pretty clear to me that if you believe that there's something more than what this existence is about, then death is not a finality, right? Even if you don't believe necessarily that you're going to go to heaven, or playing harp on a cloud somewhere, that there's this with religious beliefs. I think gives us a sense of, and it doesn't necessarily have to be just religious, spiritual too. You feel that you're part of something greater. So I think having children can help, being a part of your community, having a religious belief, believing in a hereafter, or being part of something greater. It softens the blow so that you feel that there's so important when we get older to have a spiritual sense, so that we don't feel that life is wasted and that, or it's just that's the end and there's nothing more. So yeah, if people who have religious beliefs, I mean, it's statistically are less susceptible to thanatophobia for that reason. Yeah.
So you talk about the antidote to thanatophobia is to have a full life. That
That's one of the
basically.
ways. Yeah, I mean, I think so. Working with patients who have this concern, excuse me, I've recommended things such as getting involved in doing volunteer work, reconnect with your family if you feel that you're not as connected as you should be or could be. Take up some hobby that you've always wanted to do, or creative art, or start checking off your bucket list. Start traveling to places that you always wanted to explore. Live, yeah, or look inward and establish a deeper relationship with those that you are already close with. All those things can help to, as Marcus Aurelius had advised. But the other is to help people to examine. Sometimes it's helpful in a more psychoanalytic way, the roots of their fears of death. Sometimes it can represent something different than as it is experienced, or sometimes I use something called cognitive therapy, which is to help people to look at the irrationality of their fears and how those distortions magnify their fears. Or helping people using exposure behavior therapy to become more familiar. It's called desensitization, by exposing yourself to death, so it's less fearsome, it's less scary.
And how would you do that? How would a person expose themselves to that?
Attend a few funerals, go to a hospital, talk with someone who has a terminal illness, things of that nature, so that death becomes more of a natural process. People who are hospice workers often talk about the joy they feel in the work that they do, which seems kind of a paradox. How would that be? Because they connect with people at a deeper level. It's a very meaningful connection for them. Brings them closer to life.
That I could see that happening. What about animals? I noticed that people, when they're older, they have very, very close relationships with like an animal. Is that part of the antidote to this feeling?
I think so. I mean, especially if you don't have children, but even if you do, people as they get older are more alone. And so animals provide that kind of companionship and that unconditional love. So, I think that animals are a wonderful way, having an animal companion, pets, to assuage the feelings of emptiness or loneliness associated with thanatophobia.
Well, I think I'm going to get an animal after this discussion. And I'm also noticing, as I'm listening to you, I'm also noticing that people who are senior do much more volunteer work than other people. Now, part of it is because they're not working full time, but they're choosing to do that. And maybe subconsciously, they're choosing to be part of that world to sort of make themselves feel better and to counteract this thanatophobia, perhaps.
Yes, I think so. I think that philosophers and psychologists have said that you get more bang for your buck in how you live and making a connection with the world when you make a contribution rather than expecting the world to come to you and to make you happy. Absolutely. So volunteer work is a great way to feel that sense of fulfillment, feeling good about yourself, but mainly feeling that you're making a connection, that you're making the world a better place. Even if it's a small thing, it can have a tremendous impact on your mental health and your feeling well-being.
Well, that's a whole different topic. We could talk about the entitled generation, that of which we've always talked a little bit about. But I want to say that I'm happy to hear that the solution to everything is to have a full life. Always to have a full life and always to go forward. And I want to end with with Woody Allen's the saying by Woody Allen. I'm going to read: "I am not afraid of death. I just don't want to be there when it happens." So thank you for that. And thank you, Dr. Hamm, as always, very interesting, and very timely, very, very timely. And I'm looking forward to the next timely topic, as always.
Okay, thank you, Pat.
Thank you.